Direct Connection is made by MPT to serve all of our diverse communities and is made possible by the generous support of our members. Thank you. Live from Maryland Public Television, this is Direct Connection with Jeff Salkin.
Hello, I'm Yolanda Vasquez, and thanks for joining us tonight. Identifying cardiac-related risks in both young and older athletes. We'll talk with two specialists in the field coming up later on in the show, but first, putting an end to wrongful convictions. It can sometimes take years and a mountain of evidence to prove someone's innocence. Joining me now to talk about her extensive work in this field is Michelle Nethercott. She's the director of the Innocence Project Clinic at University of Baltimore's School of Law. Michelle, it's a pleasure to welcome you here to our studio.
Thank you.
Let's talk a little bit more about IPC. It was first started, I guess, in 2008. Tell me a little bit more about the University of Baltimore's involvement in this. I mean, it's part of a national project, right?
Yes, well, it's a collaboration between the Office of the Public Defender and the University of Baltimore Law School. The Innocence Project in Maryland actually began in the Office of the Public Defender. I got involved in it because I was, at that time, head of the forensics division for the office, and I learned quite a bit about DNA, and as is historically the case in so much of this wrongful conviction work, I initially got involved in it through handling DNA testing requests for people who had been convicted. And then in an effort to combine resources, because resources are always a problem in this line of work, the two entities came together to collaborate and provide their respective resources. And I teach law students, and I also do the work.
Can you tell me how the clinic works? I mean, those who you assist, because I'm always curious to find out, how does this all come to be? Do you have folks who are in prison who contact you and say, hey, can you help me?
Yes.
Or perhaps yes. Or perhaps many, or perhaps family members. I mean, what's the criteria? How do you figure out who you're going to assist and who not to assist?
Well, as a practical matter, because our requests for our assistance vastly outnumber our resources.
What's that number? Like you have 100 requests for only
200 a year.
Wow. Okay.
We really are only able to get to people that are serving very serious crimes. Time for very serious crimes, because we prioritize those people who are serving life sentences. We, quite frankly, almost never get to crimes that are anything less than murders, serious sexual assaults, or attempted murders.
Because they're not in jail as long as other people, or just because you don't have the time to be able to cover all of these?
Because we just don't have the time and resources to cover crimes that don't have such incredibly serious consequences. And as a result, we don't really know too much about that whole category of crimes, you know, how big a problem or how little of a problem it might be. But people will call, write, they'll have relatives, friends call and write. Sometimes we get referrals from attorneys. I've had referrals, interestingly, from the federal prosecutor, U.S. Attorney's Office, and so there are a variety of ways, but usually it's because somebody gets in touch with us. And then it's a very long, intensive process. We have them fill out an application form. We collect every document we can find, which includes court documents. We try then to access all the investigative reports, crime lab reports, and usually in a lot of these cases, except for the occasional ones where you know, a DNA test can definitively answer the question, we end up doing a lot of reinvestigation. You know, going out and trying to track down witnesses, find them, talk to them. In some instances, basically kind of resolving the case. If we have a path towards that where there's clear that there was an alternate suspect who was, you know, not correctly identified in the original investigation.
Besides DNA evidence, what are some of the ways that you're able to overturn convictions, which, by the way, is not an easy thing to do?
No, it's not. It's an incredibly difficult thing to do. The courts have an enormous reluctance to overturn convictions, particularly in cases that involved convictions for very serious crimes. It's understandable. There is a notion that once the trial has occurred and the verdict has been rendered, you have to have something extremely compelling to be able to get a court to revisit that original finding. But even beyond that, there are so many procedural barriers that I don't think it's widely understood that even if you have compelling evidence of innocence, you may not be able to get the claim considered because it's not considered newly discovered in the legal sense, which is quite different from what people might think of in the colloquial sense of that term meaning. So it's very difficult. It's very difficult in some instances to even get the evidence before a judge for any kind of finding.
One of the things that I was researching and discovered, and it makes perfect sense, is one of the biggest issues with wrongful convictions is that the person who committed the crime is still out there free and could potentially commit more crimes. I mean, is that one of your biggest concerns? To know that the wrong person is imprisoned?
Well, obviously, yes, that's a concern. As the person who, if I've made a decision that I'm going to represent someone, if I've gone through the screening process and decided that I think they have a valid claim, obviously they are my first priority. Now, clearly, as a citizen, it's alarming. It's often, it's one thing that's quite interesting. There's studies have been done on murder cases in particular, and one of the leading causes of wrongful conviction in murder cases specifically, based on a study of about 500 plus exonerations, is that the person who actually committed the crime became involved in persuading the investigators that someone else had done it. And so that's a little bit disturbing. So yes, it's disturbing if there's obviously the injustice of, someone serving time for somebody else's crime. But yes, there is this problem. And it's been particularly an issue that has been seen in sexual assault cases because people who engage in, rapes have a tendency to do it more than once. And so in a number of the DNA exoneration cases, quite a large number actually, the real perpetrator was identified through DNA database hits. Yeah.
We're going to go to the phones right now. We have Lisa on the line from Allegheny County. Lisa, go ahead.
Thank you for taking my call. I'm curious to know that most of the arrests, do they already include a DNA analysis before you get your hands on it? And couldn't the Freedom of Information Act get that information for you?
So you understand the question clarified. Is there DNA already when they've been convicted, or is DNA coming later? Is that your question, Lisa?
Yeah.
Okay,
well, first of all, people need to understand there's a misconception about this. Very few cases are amenable to resolution through DNA testing. Drive-by shootings you're not going to resolve that through DNA testing. Sexual assaults obviously are more amenable, but these intimate samples. But in many, many instances, DNA is just simply not going to answer the question. Secondly, many of the cases we have, in some cases, there was no DNA testing done for any number of reasons. Sometimes due to the age of the cases, forensic DNA testing was just not even really on the scene. And in some instances, there actually was some testing, but now there's more sophisticated testing that can answer questions that the original versions of the forensic testing kits couldn't. So it comes in all forms. But an MPIA request doesn't tell you whether physical evidence still exists.
Good point. Let's go back to the phones. We have Larry on the line from Howard County. Larry, go ahead.
Hi, good evening, and thank you for taking my call. My question concerns the Adnan Syed conviction. On a trip down from Vermont last week, I listened to the entire podcast, and it left me with quite a few questions concerning his innocence. Something like the DNA and some other evidence was not entered into, evidence. I just wondered if the Innocence Project has looked at this case at all.
Thank you for your call. We appreciate it. This is a popular one. In fact, HBO is going to be doing a documentary on it after the podcast. Any involvement with this one, or?
No.
Not familiar with the case in terms of the details?
I am not handling the case, and really shouldn't speak to it because I'm not representing him.
Okay,
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I saw that there's a national registry of exonerations, and I was surprised by the tagline. It said currently 2,384 exonerations, more than 20,945 years lost, because with each person who's wrongfully convicted, they could spend up to decades in jail. And interestingly enough, it looks like there are about 30 exonerations here in Maryland, but other places like Texas and California and Illinois, they have hundreds. What's the difference in the numbers?
Well, they're bigger populations. California dwarfs the population of Maryland. So some of that just is a reflection of population. Some of it is a reflection of whether or not there is a resourced and active innocence project in those states.
Mm-hmm.
There are states that don't have no one is looking at these cases, and so you're not seeing exonerations. It can also be a function of peculiarities of state law. Some states have laws which make it much more difficult for someone to obtain an exoneration. So it's a variety of factors.
Can you share with me some of your success stories over the years? I know Tyrone Jones was a name that was on your website. Tell me a little bit more about him, or just another one where you overturned a conviction.
Well, I guess I could probably start with the most recent one,
Sure.
which is these stories are always bittersweet because, it's very hard to feel good about celebrating the fact that I just represented a man, Clarence Shipley, who was released just before Christmas. He served 27 years for a murder that he didn't commit. He went into prison when he was 19. And in that case, I spent about 4 years doing investigative work, basically going back and talking to witnesses. But I kind of hit a wall because there were certain critical witnesses who just would not talk to me. And of course, I don't have any power to make them talk to me. And fortunately, I was able to persuade the Conviction Integrity Unit in the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office that there were some problems with this case, and they did their own. They followed up with the people that I'd spoken with, but they were also able to get other people to talk to them, and they actually concluded and agreed with me that the person who had actually done this murder was not my client.
It was not Clarence Shipley. Our time is going quickly. I just have to ask real quickly about compensation for exonerees. Some people might get out of jail and get $1.3 million. Others may get out and get $300,000. Some get nothing. Is there any legislation that's being crafted in that area?
Yes, most of them get nothing. There is a compensation law in Maryland, but in its current incarnation, it requires a pardon from the governor or a certification of innocence by the state's attorney that prosecuted the person. However, with that law, no one has been compensated in this state since 2004. So when you talk about these, people getting millions of dollars, there are people who have obtained those judgments as a result of civil litigation. Now, typically that's 6, 7, maybe 10 years after the fact. The problem exonerees face is they need help immediately. They don't even get the reentry services that people who were, there's no question about their guilt, but they get some kind of reentry services. But our clients are just, literally, they don't have ID, they don't have money. Sometimes they literally have nowhere to go, and it's a huge problem. And it's given what a wealthy state Maryland is, we really need to be doing a better job on this score than we are.
I think we're going to leave it right there. Michelle Nethercott, thank you so much for coming, and really a fascinating topic and so much information that you've shared with us tonight. We appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your inviting me. Thank you.
And when we come back, sudden heart issues in athletes. When should older athletes and even young athletes be screened?
Got an unused vehicle going nowhere? Donate it to the one place that can take you any place. Visit mpt.org/vehicles and support the programs you love on MPT.
The MPT app puts our programs right at your fingertips, so you can choose when to watch, what to watch, wherever you want to watch it. Download it now.
Are you turning 70 and a half this year? If so, you generally have to start spending down your retirement account. Even the minimum distribution can place you in a sticky situation. Luckily, you can now use your IRA to make tax-free gifts. Gifts up to $100,000 will never count as income, but always make a difference. That's icing on the cake.
Make your gift for this year before December 31st. Visit mpt.org/support.
Growing up in the 80s, we used to play hide and go seek, hopscotch. All of a sudden, those streets I used to play in were flooded with violence and drugs. I looked out my window where my neighbor had been shot, and I really didn't see myself making it to 21. I retreated to my living room to find safety. PBS became a window into a broader world. If I ran home, I got to watch Bob Ross. It would just soothe me. Art is an extremely important part of my life today. I'm one of the founding members of Artists for Humanity. I do my best to keep kids out of gangs, to make sure that there is a clear path towards success. I found that path through PBS. Growing up, sometimes I felt despair, but when you can turn on the television and see a beautiful world, it gives you hope that you can make it to that world.
In the studio for this week's Your Health are Dr. Jeffrey Rosenthal, pediatric cardiologist from the University of Maryland Children's Hospital, and Dr. Scott Jerome. He is a cardiologist with University of Maryland Medical Center. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming in, and I appreciate you bringing props because that always helps.
Thank you for
And we're going to
having us.
address that in a second, but I want to first start off by talking about the fact that you are partnering with the University of Maryland College Park to sort of screen all active student athletes. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, why that's happening and how long that's been going on for?
So the screening process for college athletes has involved sports medicine doctors, orthopedists, athletic trainers, and others. And in the last few years, the athletic department at Maryland, and actually throughout the university system, the athletic departments have wanted to increase the screening for cardiovascular risk factors. So we are increasingly involved as part of a larger team that's trying to create a context where athletes can participate safely.
We hear a lot about major injuries to the body, right, for athletes, torn ACLs, minor sprains, hamstrings, the whole nine, but we don't really hear a lot when it comes to heart issues or heart defects. Is it just that sports cardiology is something relatively new, or what are the reasons why we're starting to pay more attention and more focus on heart issues?
Heart issues have always been around, and you've always heard a basketball player collapses and drops dead, even back into the 70s and 60s, and it always makes big news. A young
cases, yep.
Yep. All of a sudden, it makes big news, and it's a person who's supposed to be at the peak of their health, and how did they die? What happened to them? So many times it's asymptomatic until a seminal event happens. Something bad. Our job is to try to find out who's at risk ahead of time and prevent that from happening, whatever sport they're playing in.
What does a sports cardiologist do that sort of maybe differs from a regular cardiologist in terms of, is it screenings, or what is it in particular?
Yeah. So the usual pre-participation screening for athletes in the United States involves taking a detailed history both for the athlete and for the athlete's family to understand the health history, and then a physical exam. And in the sports cardiology domain, for athletes where there's any concern at all based on that initial screen, we do further testing. So we may do EKG testing, echocardiography, which is ultrasound testing of the heart, exercise testing, long-term monitoring of heart rhythms. So the sports cardiologist really comes in when the initial screen has indicated that there might be a problem, so that we can approach athletes safe, and keep them safe.
Scott, can you tell me a little bit more about these props that you brought in? What exactly am I looking at here?
So this is actually a heart, and there's
yes.
two sides to the heart. There's a right side and a left side, and both are affected by athletics. Depending on what kind of sport you're doing, it changes the heart size and changes the heart function. So what's normal in a non-athlete all of a sudden may look abnormal, and boy, maybe that's an athletic heart versus a normal heart. So this is kind of what a heart looks like.
And what kind of a difference is it in terms of the sport that you're doing, whether it's more a weight-bearing sport or an endurance sport like training for a marathon?
Right. So an endurance sport like a marathon causes this chamber the left side to dilate, just get bigger, as well as the walls get thicker, where a weightlifter, somebody who uses a lot of strength, doesn't really dilate, but the wall thicknesses get much thicker. So if you look at that heart on a normal person, you'd say,
we're looking
boy,
at a graphic now, right?
Yeah. So you can see the difference between the endurance athlete and the strength athlete and how the heart's size, how it dilates, how the walls thicken. In a normal person, that could be really bad and dangerous, and you got to figure out whether it's an athletic heart or whether it's a normal heart.
That's a good segue to my next question of how would you define an athlete, and why is that definition of athlete so important when it comes to heart health or even heart-related risks?
Well, I mean, we actually use the common definition of athlete. So it's someone who participates in athletic activities for either recreational reasons or for more competitive reasons. There are between 7 and 8 million high school athletes in the country, and about 500,000 athletes who participate in NCAA sports. And then there are others like Dr. Jerome and myself who are weekend athletes or
weekend warriors, kind of.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly. And in some ways, the people who fall into that group are the ones who really may need sports cardiologists. Often the risk is much higher among people who think they're healthy and are going out to just exercise on the weekend.
But how do you know? I mean, I guess one of the things is, and you deal with pediatrics, so is there any way to tell if there's any defects that are present from birth that you could maybe prevent from happening later on, unless, I guess, screening testing, is that the only way?
I can address that. So around 1% of all live-born newborns have some form of congenital heart disease. So around 1% of kids are born with some form. And of those, well, actually what's happened is that people with congenital heart disease are living longer and longer. So now there are actually more adults with congenital heart disease than there are children. Some forms of congenital heart disease are such that participation in different kinds of athletic activities would be dangerous. So part of the screening involves trying to identify which student athletes may have forms of congenital heart disease that would put them at risk.
What are the other pressures that athletes may face that could cause any kind of cardiac problems or any issues that could arise?
Well, the pressure is to play. Some of these kids are scholarship athletes. They're worth a lot of money. They may be headed to pro sports. And how much is their health versus wanting to play? There's actually now a barrier between the doctor and the coach. So we don't get any pressure from anybody. We just make medical decisions.
What do you say to a student athlete who you do detect that there's a cardiac problem and that they're right in their prime or they're doing really well in high school, about to, I mean, how do you buffer that information, or do you not?
Well, you know, we approach them with the sensitivity that sports are an important part of their lives, but our primary concern is their long-term health. So we approach that, we try to understand what their risk is with different athletic activities, and then we work with them as physicians to try to mitigate their risk.
Dr. Jerome, since we've got this other prop here, is there anything that you can tell me a little bit more about this? We're looking obviously at a heart again. Anything we need to know in particular?
Well, you know, we have the heart in the middle, and we've got the lungs, and of interest, there's the aorta in the back, and if you notice, a lot of these basketball players are 7 feet tall and things like that. Sometimes that's a genetic problem that can actually weaken that aorta, this big tube, and sometimes it can rupture, and that's one of the things that we look out for.
An aortic dissective tear, perhaps?
Exactly, or a disease called Marfan syndrome in these very tall people.
Right, and in some of those instances, if you don't catch that in time, I mean, that's pretty fatal. Or am I wrong about that?
It can be. If it's not detected, it can be. And you know, I have to say that the sports medicine doctors, not just sports cardiologists, but the sports medicine doctors work as a team. These doctors are very good at identifying not just cardiovascular risks, but other risks to athletes. So this is a team sport. Caring for athletes is a team sport, and the University of Maryland has invested a lot in the care of its athletes.
If an older person wants to start exercising, what are some of the heart-healthy ways to do it?
Well, as the athlete gets older, the common things start. They have risks for high cholesterol or high blood pressure, and they think they're healthy. And if you think about heart attacks, most heart attacks, they were fine one day. Next day, they had their heart attack and died. Right? So someone says, oh, I'm going to start doing I'm going to train for this 10K or a marathon race. So we want to kind of look at these patients in a different light. They're just not going to go out and walk they're going to start doing some heavy-duty activity. So they want to start off really slow, and they want to be screened ahead of time to make sure they don't have underlying heart disease that we don't know about.
Well, yeah. You know, also we ask adults and other athletes about whether they have any symptoms with exercise. Mm-hmm. Are they experiencing chest pain with exercise? A change in their ability to exercise? Have they ever fainted? These are all important questions that help to create some focus around what we should be screening for.
Speaking of screening, what would you recommend people say to their doctors? Do they say, I need to see a cardiologist, I'm doing some endurance training? I mean, how do you even broach the conversation, and to whom, in terms of testing and screening?
It was interesting. I had a patient that just popped up and said, I want to do a 100-mile race. And I said, wow, so that's a lot of endurance. And he went to his regular doctor, and his doctor said, 100 miles, that's a huge amount of running. You need to see a sports cardiologist for that. So that's how he popped up. It depends on how much activity they're actually doing. But somebody who's starting from zero, they really need to gradually get into this.
We've got about 30 seconds left. What's some last-minute advice you'd like to give to student athletes to help them, be more preventative in their care when it comes to heart issues?
I think the biggest issue is to just be honest. If they're experiencing symptoms, to speak with their trainer, with the physical therapy team, or with their coaches and other docs.
Wonderful. Gentlemen, thank you very much. We appreciate that. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
And Thursday at this time on Your Money in Business, big changes at the MVA, what you need to know to make it all happen. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We will see you again soon.
Your Health segments are a co-production of Maryland Public Television and the University of Maryland Medical System.
This program was made by MPT to serve all of our diverse communities.